Well, thank you so much for jumping on the call, Kabir. Really appreciate it. For everyone listening, could you love to hear a bit of background to yourself? I guess what your role is, where you work, and a bit of your, I guess, history in the mining tech world.
No, thanks, Alex, and thanks, David, for having me. So my background, I'm actually an aeronautical engineer with the MBA. I'm an engineer by heart, but driven by good commercial business outcomes. That's the way I like to put it. Um, my experience has been fairly varied. So I didn't take a traditional route into mining per se. I started in renewables first, and I worked on the first solar farms that went across in most countries in the world. So started in India, then Australia, worked on the largest solar farms that went up there. And from renewables, went into battery, wave technology, a whole bunch of, cutting edge stuff, accelerated commercialization, and then worked myself into a bit like venture capital for a little bit, and then into innovation and startups, and then into mining. Um, so within mining, I was with a group called the Red Button Group or Quartile One, which was a consulting company with very deep roots around asset benchmarking. And then they eventually got acquired by Oricon, which is a much larger engineering firm. And and in Oricon, I used to co-lead a team which was called Technology Value Realization, and then eventually made my way into BHP. So solving some of mining problems, I guess, where digital technology and operations intersect is where I work. So sorry, I didn't answer the question, but my current role is I'm the lead for digital product development in the core digital factory in BHP. What my team does is we source, validate, and prototype high value use cases where digital or technology can really um, change the pendulum or really accelerate or uplift BHP's performance across people performance and productivity, safety also. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. And is that I mean, only to obviously disclose what you can, but is that sort of your job? Is that they do you sort of look at the supply chain, look at the processes, and you sort of find where there's hidden efficiencies, or is it sort of like bottom up? People sort of say, "Hey, we want these things improved."
So it's actually a bit of both. So the way the DPD team and the core digital factory is set up. So we actually the funnel for the ideas which feed the factory, and then with factory has capacity and the capability to build it, they build the digital solution. Otherwise, then we work with partners to build the solutions. But how we source those ideas is really interesting. So we've got a trommel process by which the business itself submits its ideas. And then we also are guided by the business's, I guess, strategic priorities as we navigate whatever market conditions and internal conditions that we might be. So from that point of view, the business gives us ideas, and then we go and seek ideas where we think there's value to be had.
Awesome, that's fantastic. Because I think something that we're pretty passionate about is, I think innovation is fantastic, and particularly new technology, but ensuring that is it coming from the problem backwards, or is it coming from an idea that someone's just heard in a conference and wants to buy a new shiny thing. And so that's cool to hear. And I think probably for that leads to the next question on we're pretty passionate about digital twins and with a bit of AI and so other things sort of related on that. But focusing on digital twins, I know for a lot of miners and pretty much everyone really who's in this sort of industry, it's a very vague topic. And I think out of even our CEO did his masters in digital twins, and at the end he still doesn't know what they mean. So I was going to say, from like an innovation, you said venture capitalists looking into mining now, your experience with, or even just the phrase and concept of digital twins, how would you sort of summarize what they are and what they actually do within the mining industry?
Oh my God, I feel this is like a trick question. You're gonna go have a gotcha moment here, but I'll try my best. So I actually had worked with some really capable people in Oricon, and then they helped me really define what a digital twin is. So I actually break down digital twin into three different use cases. So I break it down as a asset twin, or a process twin, or a system of twins, or twins of twins. And I think then you can actually take that definition and say, it's a digital representation of the physical asset in the real world. for an asset twin. So by which you can do that for a process twin, it's a virtual replication of the process itself in the virtual world, and by which you can run different scenarios and do a whole bunch of modeling. And then system of twins is a combination of those two. Um, that's my best attempt at it. I'm sure if I quickly go to Google, I might steal some other keywords there, but in the simplest form, that's what I think it is.
Yeah, nice. And I think that's a very good answer on the spectrum of ones we've heard. And I think I think that's part of the fun of it, but also I think probably even the more important question on top of that is, why we're hearing more and more now. I think between 2021 to now, it's gone up by like 75%, search results and people doing projects in digital twins and the concepts, for lack of a better word, trending. Why do you think that is? Like, I guess what is the purpose of a digital twin? Why, like, what would it change within a mining industry?
I think digital twins there's two parts to it. I think they've poorly understood the use case of digital twins and what digital twins themselves are. And secondly, why are they really important in mining is another question which I wanted to kind of touch. They're poorly understood because most of the people who actually, I think there haven't been very many great use cases where they've actually been, well, I think they're
You're right.
poorly understood because there's people group a whole bunch of different things into digital twins, the bucket. So the fact that if someone could actually do a 3D map of asset or process in virtually, and that would be based on node or functional location, people call that as digital twins. So digital twins are a term which are very loosely used. I guess the application mining becomes is, I guess, mining inherently by its very nature is slightly dangerous compared to other professions that you see out there. I wouldn't say it's very unique, but I would say it's actually a high risk operation or business to some extent, especially if you're in your front line. And anything which takes away a person's focus who's on the front line and working on it from the work they're doing actually creates a risk for us. And this is where I think the role of digital twins can come into play, is because it can help people at the back who support these people to execute tasks well, is to set them up for success.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I think that's a great answer. And probably off the back of that too, and mainly, probably more specifically towards your role being sort of a pretty unique product lead within the organization. With everything, I'm sure you've come across heaps of different processes and problems to solve with new technology. What do you see as the sort of trend going into maybe just 2023 for now, but like with those problems that are coming up and the gaps to fill and things to get better at? AI is a very easy answer because we've got ChatGPT, but is there something, is there a bit of a trend that you're noticing even the last couple of years to sort of now that you're like, this is really interesting, I feel like we're starting to gravitate towards this direction in forms of technology?
I think there's been a growing interest in digital and technology in mining, and I have to say mining in some aspects, even though people consider it fairly backward in a lot of respects or laggards in technology adoption, are actually at the forefront of technology or adoption when it comes to some parts of automation, even remote operations. And key to having remote operations to some extent, you do need very good digital representation of your assets, understanding to actually operate them continuously without being on the gold place, so to say. I think it's taken a greater interest because, if you go back almost 20-ish years, 20 years ago, wow, that's a long time. Sorry. Mining was inherently different. Dangerous people used to lose their lives. People used to get hurt. And from there, they made a very, very marked change, step change in how they operate, where, we can't hurt people anymore. And everything that we have is to make sure people don't get harmed at the coal face. First of all, safety is key priority, which is also, which sits above productivity to some extent and cost also in most aspects. So I think as we embark on the journey, as people understand technology better and they see use cases which are trialed and tested in other places, mining is starting to adopt them a lot faster. We have our own niche use cases, especially when you think about long-haul operations and you think about some underground operations that we have. But but we are actually starting to adopt more. I mean, for example, if I talk about BHP, we've got autonomous trucks and running all around 2 circuits in Queensland itself. And you wouldn't have that if you didn't have a good understanding of your digital representation of your assets and the mine layout and your operations in a 3D world, so to speak.
Mm, mm,
But I do think this trend, and sorry to coming back to your answer, is I do think there will be a much wider adoption as time goes on, and it will be driven by safety.
mhm.
The more we move people away from the coal face, the more I think that's something which mining is really trying to do. Technology is maturing also as we see more use cases come. Obviously, piloting something is inherently risky to a lot of the aspects. If something breaks down in the continuous process, like you can lose millions of dollars for unscheduled downtime.
Mm.
So yeah, I think as technology matures, use cases mature, there will be wider adoption of that. We are getting a better understanding of our risks and the risks with technology adoption and also digital adoption, which also helps with that.
Mhm.
I hope
Absolutely.
that answered the question.
No, it does. It does. And I was going to say on that too, for that adoption side of things, I think something Dave and I are pretty passionate about, sort of being startup world and mining world as well. I think there's seeing these amazing pieces of technology and these, revolutionary ideas, but literally going to the coalface and not having that traction and getting people on board has seems to be where so many fall down. And I think there's like a what we call, I don't think we made it up, but I'm going to say we did, the digital twin fallacy, which is like, I think when the idea 10 years ago, if you want to make a stretch, was, we digitalize everything. We've got a virtual world that every variable we can think of, and it's, we can test and simulate, blah, blah. But then it's like they created these huge things that, speaking to one, and I won't name names, but it was like 3.5 minutes to load each screen. And, the engineers just end up going back to what they were doing for the last 20 years. And it was like such a big gap in adoption. And so I think, in a full circle to the question on that is, what are your thoughts on like the digital twin fallacy, since you're like a product hat on, when people want to do it, you've got these massive beasts. Should they be doing smaller ones? Like, if someone came to you and said, build me a digital twin, what would be your advice back?
To give you an example, so like I said, I the team which I work in, my team's responsibility is to source, validate, and prototype high-value use cases, digital use cases, and digital solutions that will inherently uplift PHP's performance. Staggering figure, which you can notice, if we get 10 ideas, we try to fail seven of them. So we actively try to fail a lot more ideas and actually take them into prototyping. And the reason for that is we really want to progress only those ideas which have really high value and high use case value. So even though when someone comes and says, "Hey, let's go digital twin," we have a number of frameworks. We've got prioritization criteria that we work through. But I think fundamentally it comes down to what is the decision you're trying to make? How does that decision affect the value proposition, either safety, productivity, or cost wise? And what is the information you need to make that decision? And and then from there, does digital twin solve that problem?
Mm.
I mean, now digital twin is unique in the sense that it can actually group a whole bunch of use cases together and solves that. And you can almost say, like, it's not as simple as having a simulation model, for example, or having a reporting dashboard or some kind of fancy machine learning algorithm which affects one part. A digital twin is like it's actually to be considered a consolidation of a bunch of other use cases like that. So um, I think it's a bit of a maturity curve there also. I feel like I've blabbered on a bit on that, but yeah, I think short answer is it's got to have a very strong use case. And the use case starts from, what is the decision you want to make, a data-driven decision-making framework, applying that. What is the value deliver? And then what is the information data you need? What is the tool you need to make that decision?
Yep.
In the absence of not having all the data, what can you work with now? And as you get more data and the right information coming in, you start maturing that process along the way.
Gotcha. So does that sort of, not to put words in your mouth, but the whole like product sort of agile iterative mindset, would that sort of come across?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if it's agile. So agile, it can be considered agile because agile is saying like what's the backlog I take into my build. But I think this is more fundamentally coming down to even before you go agile is like really why do you need this? What is the decision you really want to make? And really focusing on that. And if you can nail that down, and most cases people would love to have information and visibility about their process, and they definitely should. But people kind of, I wouldn't say confused, but um, I can't find a word for it. Like it's they misdirect the use case for the decision they want to make.
Mm,
And if you really press them around that, do I really need to have short interval control? And within short interval control, what do I need to do before I can assign a truck from one circuit to another?
mm,
Like and what is the value of that decision? So even if I do that, what is the net value of that? People have a very poor understanding in some cases of that. And then the expectation of what you need to make that decision, the amount of information and data and the tools is also, I would say, like, is poorly understood to some extent.
yeah, right. That's yeah, completely agree. And I think probably that, as far as the decision making, that's probably a good transition. One of our ones is, like, I guess with digital twins, is that, and to your point, there is better decision making. There's a consolidated model, or whatever you want to call it, with a lot more information, a lot more collaboration. But then it's always that next one around simulations and predictions. And now, since the great GPT came out, there's everyone's asking, how do we use this? What do we do? Is it? What's your sort of, I guess, and happy to share just a realistic reflection of, there's some people we speak with, they go, nah, it'll be a fad, it'll be gone in 2 months. Other people are like, we're going to be without a job. How do we go from, I know our CEO talks a lot about going from rules-based decisions through experience, and then moving towards like prediction and prescriptions through data. Like, what do you think's the realistic journey right now within mining? Are we going to jump there really quickly, or is it like a step-by-step process? Is it micro areas, point solutions? Like, what does that sort of look like?
Yeah, again, I would say that it seems like a very straightforward question, but it's actually got multiple. It's very led, and the
Yeah.
answer is probably more led, in my opinion. Um, so I think within mining as a whole, and this is the challenge because like different parts of mining are on different maturity curves. The different, even if you think about different ops and different functions, the maturity across that varies greatly, and that varies to some extent around data, data availability, the process automation itself, the way we do things, the way we manage risk also. So I think there'll be parts of several processes or functions within mining which will adopt this fairly quick because there'll be a direct use case that they can apply to, or there'll be an enhancement, or there'll be a step up there. In other places, it'll be hard, and that's a challenge because you can't have one part of mining really accelerate so much into the future that the rest can't keep up. There's no point
Mhm.
because in the end, mining is like one continuous process.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think I would like to say it's like it's an easy adoption. It's a step, but what it is it's actually you head 2 steps in one direction, then you head 3 steps in another direction, then you come back 2 steps, and then that's how I think this whole adoption might look. As people understand it better, some people will take risks and apply it faster, and they'll do some trials and prototypes. There are others will say once it's in place, they'll say, no, this doesn't validate what we want, and then there'll be a stop. And then someone else is going to try it, and then they can say, oh, you've finally come to a level of maturity where we can actually work with you and apply this tool
Mm,
where it
mm.
makes sense.
Absolutely. I think probably one of my last ones would be, and again, might be a very broad, open question, but people, and to your point then before, people on different levels of maturity in different areas, and there's different organizations we speak with, from, vendors to consultants, and to the miners themselves, the coalface, the head office, and internationally. And, there's some that would just say, hey, what is a digital twin? Why should we even bother? Or, you know, should we spend like 4 years cleaning our data first? And which we say yes, but like looking at looking at like all your different areas there for someone who's maybe not as inclined or not as familiar with, you know, all this new high tech and this industry 5.0 and everyone's sort of reaching for the stars today. You mentioned before about focusing on the problem and the gap and the value of the decision. What would be a sort of your advice if someone's like, what should I do from here? Where should I start?
Yeah, I think number one would be know your audience and know your customer. And that customer, depending on who you speak to in mining, is going to change. It changes within the same mining company also. Like I said, it comes down to different maturity levels there. If you understand your customer and understand their pain point and where they fit in that entire, you know, process or that machinery, um, you will have a better understanding of what tool is apt to solve their problem and what degree or nth degree does it need to be? Does it need to be a simple dashboard just getting them data because they have no data?
Mm,
Or is it the fact that they need a digital twin or digital twin type solution because their problem is around because they work with so many different functions, so many different data processes, or and consolidate the only way they can actually get a better outcome is they need something of that kind of evolution. Does that make sense?
mm, mm,
Um, know your customer, I think, and understand the operations, because I think the beauty about machine learning or some of these technology tools is they can be applied to mining. You don't
mm,
need, um, but you really need to understand the context of the person who's going to be using it, and
mm,
is that decision going to be made on a almost like a tactical level, which is like, you know, in shift, and you're trying to make a decision right now, and that decision has repercussions for other people also who are working the shift, or is it a planning decision which actually sets up the actual shifts for success? Do you know what I
mm,
mean? There's two different
mm.
types of decisions. I don't think people have made tools which are interoperable with other tools, and that's the challenge. Mining in its own supply chain and its own process from top down is so fragmented that there's so much opportunity there,
Mm,
and that opportunity creates a lot of shadow solutions,
mhm.
solutions which are fit for one part of the business but can't be scaled.
Yeah,
And
right.
then there's a challenge because then you can't actually make them interoperable with other systems also,
Yep.
and hence it becomes an isolated little perfect solution.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it can never scale. Um, uh, or
Or even talk to each other and potentially, yeah, I see what you mean. It's all very, and that's probably the biggest thing. And whether that's, again, this isn't a plug to a digital twin, but this is probably one of the ones of cross collaboration, each OEM having their own system and their own siloed way of doing things, their own, you know, fundamental architecture, and it makes that whole flow of information so much more difficult.
and then one of the reasons I think mining companies are going down the road they are around having their own digital teams, or you know, because they start to understand their own data has a lot of value,
Mm,
and none of the providers out there are actually giving them the right respect for that data which they're using and consuming. Um, and they're falling short to some aspects. People are catching up on that. This is my personal opinion; has got nothing to do with PHP, but I
mm,
think that's where it started from. Like previously, mining used to be I just focus on mining, then we
mm,
get technology providers to provide us the solutions. That's been happening for 10 years. Technology providers are so far ahead. We work with cutting edge, I guess industries and sectors.
mm,
Why is it that mining companies are going back and saying we would do it ourselves rather than rely on people who've got 20, 30 years of experience?
mm, mm. Yeah, right. And do you think that is that the big contributor to that? Is that it's just not flowing? It's not the ecosystem, and they're just saying, "I'd rather just give it here." And feel free enough to answer anything
Like,
you don't feel
no, so
comfortable.
look, this is a massive generalization. There are people who are building tools which are interoperable, and the
Yeah.
whole premise of saying is that if you don't make this platform interoperable, this is never going to work.
Mm,
But but everyone like OEMs coming up with their own platforms and they're like putting fences around it.
mm,
It creates problems.
mm,
Um, I don't know what the solution is like, but I do know that the right model is probably not one where the mining companies themselves build their own solutions, and it's
mm,
not where they rely on third parties or technology providers to provide the solutions themselves. There's a partnership model which sits in between, which so far hasn't I haven't seen a great example of it as yet.
Hmm.
Yet to see it. Maybe I haven't looked hard enough, but there's a model which exists in there,
Yeah.
which which I guess is the opportunity.
Yep, and I think that was Michelle Ash even said that on our other interview about you know, for their own reasons, and I appreciate there's all the security and there's IP and everything that mining's concerned about, but she was saying there's other industries that are very open and collaborate back and forth and happy to share whatever they need to share, and whether that is a cause and effect, I don't know, but a lot of those ones seem to progress faster in certain areas. So yeah, I'm not someone to say that's the reason, but it's kind of interesting. And probably the last one, and I'll kick myself if I didn't ask it, and I apologize. I know I said the last question before. The adoption of people on site using your ones, and granted the problems and the gaps come to you, and you come back with a proposed solution. When you roll something out on site, even if it's something that they've asked for, do you come up with a lot of resistance? And then if you do, two-part question: how do you get around that? What's your biggest advice for rolling things out on site? Because I feel there's usually such a big disconnect between head office and site.
Yeah, it comes back to my first point of if you know your customer and if you really understand the environment they operate in, like, if you think about operations, they're 24/7. You got two shifts. People end up working 12, 14 hours a shift. They start with the pre-start. They've got, a huge focus on safety, and they go, go, go. So I think if you know your customer well and you design a tool for them, which makes their life easier but does not create work for them, is the first one. Sometimes that's not always the case, and that's one of the places where it falls down. The first part is that you end up creating an app, and then you kind of realize that I can't take an iPad into the field. What's the
Mm,
point?
mm,
Yeah, so if you know mining, you can't pick up a phone call. You can't use your mobile phones in certain areas.
yeah, 100%. There's one that Dave and I worked on a while ago, and it was this, really fantastic UI UX, and it was usable and everything was great, but then just the coloring of it for some people, this was probably more in power transmission and power utilities, but the guys in the field couldn't see it in the sun, and they were like, I'll just go back to what I was doing before. Like,
Yeah.
oh, come on. Like, it's that user need is so insanely important.
Yeah, so that's one, probably, like if you understand that well and you can tailor it. And secondly, and this might be a little controversial, but this is my personal opinion. I think when people ask for help and they give you their requirements, I don't think they really know what they're after. They know what they need
Mm-hmm.
to make a decision to some extent,
Mm-hmm.
but and they've got an idea of what it should look like and feel like. In most cases, they're probably spot on, but in other cases, there's an opportunity there, and that's where I guess that challenge really comes in, is that what is the information you really need to see to make that decision? You don't need to see the entire shift's work. Maybe you don't need to see 6 different graphs, or you don't need to see a radial tile or a pie chart or streaming data set. What is absolute minimum information you need to see? And then after that, you go from there to say, okay, what should I build out to make it easy for them, and that doesn't consume too much of their time or brain rate or even capacity there. So that's one. The other one, when it comes to rollouts, change management. End of the day, remember that I think mining is a people-centered process. There are still people who are working on this. Change management is key. It's usually forgotten with technology to some extent, but it's also understanding where does technology fit into that people piece. In some cases, the technology provides decision support. It does not take over the task itself. And if you can make that distinction where it's actually it's either task automation, or it's decision support, or whatever that is, that will help you understand the change management requirements that need to go with it.
Absolutely. That's awesome. That's fantastic. No, thank you so much, mate.